Hi, everyone. Welcome to the AIM North America podcast series. This one is hosted by the Food Supply Chain Work Group. Uh, AIM North America is an alliance enabling cooperation and standardization of AIDC technologies like barcodes and RFID, which power traceability. Today, we're tackling the FSMA 204 compliance extension. Even with the new timeline, regulation is inevitable, and now is the time to act. I'm Engebretson, solution consultant at PLM TrustLink, and a member of the Food Supply Chain Work Group. I'll be moderating a timely roundtable with 3 leaders in food traceability. So let's dive in. Julie, Lucy, and Christian, will you please introduce yourselves?
Sure. So I'll start. Julie McGill. I'm the Vice President of Supply Chain Strategy and Insights at Trustwell. In my role, I work with a number of industry groups, including AIM, to understand, how we're using technology to solve business problems. And so, with that, the AIM North America Food Group is a group that I chair. And so, recognizing that we bring industry experts together from many different areas, right? They might be hardware providers, software providers, they might print barcodes or provide standards. And so bringing all these parties together to help solve those problems is, the main focus in my everyday role, but also in my role at AIM. And I'll pass it off to you, Christian.
Yes, great. Thanks, Julie. Hey, everyone. My name is Christian Hahn. I'm the Director of Technical Business Development here at FEIG Electronics and have been for the last 3 years. Here at FEIG, we manufacture RFID hardware, readers, antennas, accessories, etc., across the HF and UHF frequencies. And we've been in business for roughly 60 years. We work very closely with AIM, participating in their work groups and activities such as this. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me. Lucy?
Hi everyone, I'm Lucy Angarita, Director of Supply Chain Visibility at GS1 US. I've been working here for the last 5 years, working with different companies across industries to gain operational efficiencies, traceability, and supply chain visibility by leveraging GS1 standards. We at GS1 are known as the barcode people because there's about 10 billion scans globally every day of barcodes that we license those unique identifiers for, called global trade item numbers. But really what we do is we bring companies together to collaborate, to find solutions to their common problems throughout the supply chain. We're neutral, non-for-profit. So our idea is to have everyone just talk and work together in a very collaborative environment. And prior to GS1 US, I worked with IPC, the supply chain arm for the Subway restaurant chain. We implemented end-to-end traceability across our whole supply chain, and we were able to measure tangible ROI. So all different partners within the supply chain were involved, and it is my passion. It's a very near and dear to my heart topic. And also, I've been very focused on FSMA 204, just helping companies understand what are the actionable steps they can take in order to meet these requirements for the rule. And I'm very honored to be here and work with AIM on this effort. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all. So to set the stage here, FSMA 204 elevates traceability and being able to act quickly in the event of a recall. And FDA has announced its intention to extend the compliance date by 30 months to July 20th, 2028. Christian, can you give us just like a quick level set? We have a lot of listeners who already know this, but can you give us a FSMA 204 like 101?
Yeah, of course. A brief history or level set is always important. So FSMA is the Food Safety and Modernization Act. It was written by the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, and it was Congress's mandate in 2011 with the idea of better, protecting public health by strengthening its own, the U.S. food safety system. So specifically, FSMA 204 or Section 204 requires that these food processing companies must keep records for designated foods to protect, the overall public health by studying past outbreaks, identifying foods with the highest risks, and evaluating any traceability systems and any potential gaps in them. So if your food business manufactures, processes, packages, or holds any of the foods on the food traceability list, or the FTL, as we'll be talking about frequently in this podcast, per the FDA, you're required to provide extensive records on these items. So examples such as cheeses, eggs, fruits, vegetables, fish and shellfish, ready-to-eat salads, things like that you can find really in a supermarket are on the food traceability list. And that wasn't a complete list. That was just a few examples, right? In 2020, the FDA proposed a new rule which implements specifically Section 204 and highlights the goals to enhance this end-to-end food traceability idea. In November of 2022, the rule was published. And as Amber stated, the original deadline for compliance was in January of 2026. But to kind of give more of a runway, there was decided to extend that by 30 months to give these food companies more time to comply, get systems in place, get prepared, etc. To July 20th, 2028.
So, Julie, before this extension was announced, what were you seeing? Were companies getting prepared?
Yes, ahead of the extension, there were several partners, lots of end of chain partners, for example, such as grocery and grocery retailers, food service operators, who had their traceability plans in place. So they had, outlined their plans for how they would capture and manage traceability records for FSMA compliance. And as part of these traceability plans, these partners were educating their suppliers, educating them on the rule, setting expectations for data exchange. And these companies were also setting their own timelines for compliance. And part of that was because in order for end of chain partners to be ready for FSMA compliance, they are reliant on data from companies who deliver FTL items to them. Similarly, many broadline distributors and food manufacturers, they had similar traceability programs in place. And as you can imagine, for example, broadline distributors are dealing with tens of thousands of FTL items that are moving through their facilities. And so they're in the same boat as their customers, right? They are reliant on data. They need to get their suppliers moving now so that they themselves could be ready for that compliance timeline. So we saw a lot of education and a lot of traceability programs and a lot of communication, a lot of expectations being set. Now, with the extension announcement, I haven't really heard any major timeline changes for these stakeholder programs. All of these companies still seem to be moving forward in that same direction, right? Pushing their supplier and distributor partners to capture data, to get organized, right? So that they can begin sending data. So even though, ahead of the extension, a lot of these programs were already underway, there continued to be a big gap in education and awareness. And so that's been a big effort with, companies that are standing up their programs, educating and providing that awareness to their trading partners. So as we got closer to that 2026 deadline, the FDA was getting feedback from stakeholders. Companies were sharing their concerns over the compliance date, and companies were finding that their suppliers just weren't ready. And so if their suppliers weren't ready, right, then I'm not going to be ready. So the FDA worked with the Reagan-Udall Foundation. They held roundtables. They formally gathered feedback from industry. And that's how this compliance extension came to be, right? That recommendation to push the date out 2.5 years to July 20, 2028. So there was a lot of work going on, and there still is a lot of work happening in the space. But we recognize as an industry, and even from the work that was done by the FDA and Reagan-Udall, that there's more work to be done.
Okay, so I have a fun question for you. Why 30 months?
I
Why
know.
not 2 years or 3 years? Like, why was the extension
Right.
30 months?
So as part of any regulation, there is a period of public comment. Companies can express, their thoughts on any, proposed regulation and things like that. So with FSMA 204, there were some companies, they wanted this extension to be 10 years. There were companies who pushed and said there should be no extension, right? Everyone should work towards that original date. And so based on the feedback, Reagan-Udall did publish a report with their findings. And that was all brought into consideration as the different teams at the FDA put together the recommendation based on, they did on-site visits, they had these roundtables, et cetera, pulling all that together to come to kind of that middle ground, which is 2.5 years.
And Julie, do you feel pretty confident that that milestone date will hold?
I think that it will, just based on what we've seen in other categories, such as healthcare. Healthcare has had regulations and compliance dates that very similar situation. Industry wasn't ready, and so they were given an extension, but we haven't seen an extension to the extension, right? It's like they in taking things into consideration, the regulation's not going away, right? But the timeline, we're now moving from that 2026 to 2028.
Yep.
Right. So awareness rose, pilots were started. We've got big companies at the end of the supply chain who are pressing suppliers to get ready. Lucy, can you talk a little bit about how the companies are using the extra time, those extra 30 months? And are you seeing any sectors that are farther ahead than others that maybe we could help learn from them and bring the rest of the food supply chain along?
So yes, Amber, just like Julie mentioned, companies are not taking the foot off the gas. I mean, those leading retailers, operators, they're continuing their efforts, they're continuing their projects to establish this communication, this traceability across their supply chain. We are seeing, of course, the produce industry was one of the first to start adopting this enhanced traceability, even back in 2009 with the Produce Traceability Initiative. So the PTI label is something that's common to produce, and they've been moving forward with this. And others have been, of course, adopting this GS1 128 barcode. And even, when we started collaborating and we formed a work group, the FSMA 204 work group, where all industry members and solution providers, we could all talk associations. And the good thing to see now is with this extension, we're still seeing alignment like we've never seen in the past. I mean, those of us have to have been 10 plus years in traceability know that FSMA 204 is and has established a more standardized framework. So no matter where you are in the supply chain, you can't do this in a silo. You can't do this alone. And it's created this direction and this path that, even now we're seeing in these dear supplier letters, people like to call them, where these are the requirements we are asking of our suppliers. They're pointing to GS1 standards. They're pointing to best practice. This is something that we could have a whole bunch of other requirements for our suppliers. But if we do this, it's just going to be detrimental to everyone. So we've seen this alignment on, okay, this is what we need to do as a MVP, right? Minimum viable product. And, best practice, we want to use this specific, for example, the advanced ship notice, specific barcodes. companies are looking into, how their master data needs to be, the accuracy of this. They're using this extension to really focus on a very solid foundation of standardized data and accurate data. Because, if your master data is wrong, your traceability data will be exponentially wrong. So this is something that now that they have more time, companies are taking a step back and saying, okay, do I have the right foundation? Is it accurate? Can I continue, as Julie mentioned, to educate my partners on how we need to get this done together?
Yeah, you brought up a great term, dear valued supplier letter. Um, Julie, can you talk a little bit more about what that kind of letter is from the buyer to the supplier?
Absolutely. Yep. So as I talked about, a lot of these companies are, they put their traceability plans in place, which outline how they're going to approach FSMA 204. And as part of that plan, there's a communication component, which is communicating your expectations. And that it for many is part of that dear valued supplier letter, which outlines what they're looking for, how they expect to exchange data, and even what their expectations are as far as data accuracy, product identification, using things like GS1 128 barcodes or EDI. So as companies are starting to collect data, they're moving beyond um, just collecting the data, and they're looking at that data accuracy. And so for many, as they're reviewing data, they're finding that on both sides, right, sender and receiver, there's room for data cleanup. And so a lot of companies, they're enhancing their GTIN management processes on how they assign GTINs, when they assign. They're removing obsolete data, and they're putting new processes in place for new item setup and product changes, because having that data in sync is going to be very important. That's the foundation, right, of this data sharing that we're talking about. Many are also, as part of this uh, like validation of their programs, they're also looking at things like barcode validation. And we are starting to see that some companies that are requiring GS1 128 barcodes are now sending back reports to their suppliers where they're grading the barcodes, they're checking the scannability, and they're telling suppliers now, well ahead of the compliance date, hey, this is how we expect to collect data. We need you to fix this now. And if you're not compliant, then in the future, they may, impose fines and things like that. That's at the trading partner level, not the FDA, trading partner level. So
Mhm.
we're seeing um, kind of that shift from, hey, we need to collect the data and I need you to do the following steps, to now I'm looking at what you've sent.
Christian, can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing in the industry as far as educating, at trade shows and just within the industry? How are people getting the word out other than a dear valued supplier letter?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, I think, well, what we are seeing is, you know, in the food service industry, food and beverage industry, logistics and data collection, what Julie mentioned in terms of data accuracy, these are so not just focus points, but just vital points for businesses to track, not just for the compliancy. But there's just the added interest that I'm seeing is when I'm attending these trade shows. I've been to a number of trade shows in the past couple of years with focus on the food and beverage industry, as well as I've worked on a few projects with a previous company where we've seen some focus from the quick service restaurants or the QSRs of the world are really putting added energy into not just investigating solutions or systems to put in place for this data collection, but really planning with more focus to do this. Seeing this also in the seafood industry, no surprise, as well as getting engaged from some livestock and some dairy type businesses where, the focus on the health of your product and really each step along the way, that traceability process really needs that focus. And they're investigating the various uses of technology to automate this product and food data collection, this overall traceability, and preparing for FSMA 204. So there's a lot of knowledge out there from these businesses to follow these milestone dates and compliancy. Again, I would say even over the last 2 years, whether I've been at a trade show that FEIG might be exhibiting at, or simply just attending, there's been this added shoulder behind what are we going to do? How are we going to plan? And what is that going to look like? With just, it sounded a bit redundant here, but with just so much more purpose. If you look at the specifics of the rule, if you really get into the details of it, these food records, again, for Section 204, the food records must be produced within 24 hours of being requested by the FDA. And these records need to be maintained, for at least 2 years. So there has to be a trusted system in place to allow this to happen. Any kind of non-technological solution, antiquated, paper-based systems, however you want to refer to it, just it won't be sufficient to meet those parameters. And when do we know when an audit can occur at any time. So there needs to be a lot of preparation done, and these businesses that I mentioned are recognizing that.
Yeah, let's get out of those paper checklists, right?
Please.
So it's always been kind of a wild idea to me that there's more regulation around retail than food. So what you put on your body versus what you put inside your body. And I think as a community, like our industry, traceability in food supply chain, we owe it to the public for their safety. Let's pivot here and let's talk about how brand trust and the bottom line is impacted if companies are not FSMA 204 compliant. What should companies know about the financial implications? And we'll start with you, Julie.
Yeah, so I mean, certainly financial implications can hit in, many different ways, as recalls hit in many different ways, right? Did it start at the beginning of the chain or did it start at the end of the chain, right? If there's a big public outbreak and people are sick, those things usually make it straight to the news wires, right? And especially if lives are lost. And so, what we've seen since FSMA 204, since the rule was published, the FDA got it right. That list, that food traceability list, every single item on that list has been recalled or has been part of, some sort of investigation since the food traceability list was published. And we've seen this time and time again. There's been peanut butter, soft cheeses, and most recently, and it sounds crazy, was the radioactive shrimp. And so, many of these items, they're in people's freezers, right? And so how do we get that information out to them? And the FDA has great tools, but not all consumers can, subscribe to them. And so sometimes things are being found out either through friends or family, or it's coming through the news and things like that. And there's also a big, when you talk about those implications, there's a big difference between a recall when it hits, say, a packaged good at a grocery store versus a menu item at a restaurant. And what I mean by that is, if a certain brand of peanut butter is recalled, I don't stop going to the grocery store. I keep going to the store. I just don't buy that brand. But if there's a recall at a restaurant, I don't know if every single restaurant was affected, if every single restaurant that's part of that brand or banner, so if they were all affected. So if there's a recall, at my restaurant in San Diego, but I live in Kansas City, I might not, I might avoid that restaurant for a period of time because I heard they had a recall. And so companies recognize, especially those that already have robust traceability programs in place, they recognize the importance of visibility and being able to contain and identify where the issue is and be able to manage that much more efficiently and swiftly than having to do a blanket recall where I'm pulling things across my entire system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's such a great point about the difference between a recall at a grocery store or a restaurant chain. Uh, Christian, what do you think?
Yeah, I think, for me, I believe non-compliance tends to inherently mean a monetary fine. But I think, as we mentioned earlier, there's not necessarily a structure in place for where fines might be instituted, at least early on. But in lieu of, these possible fines, the other direct impacts to your business and these financial implications are quite significant, right? So depending on what nature of the business in the food industry that you are, having your product completely halt movement because of a recall, which would obviously, is a result of this mandatory recall being enabled, which could then result in the complete shutdown of your facility. So depending on the size of your operation, and again, how that might impact you, obviously that's massive. We're looking at potential millions in lost product and contracts, and it's just very multi-layered. So I think, these food recalls for companies can be quite expensive. And we talk about this brand damage. I think we all remember the QSR E. coli breakout from a QSR in 2015, where there was a payment of $25 million to resolve that. Obviously, highly significant payment. Shoppers want this form of transparency. The impacts to that business were significant. It was all across the news. It halted business for quite some time. Um, you know, these patrons, they want to trust what they put in their bodies is safe, and this consumer trust is really a real thing.
Mm-hmm. But Lucy, I know that you've got some good stats. Can
Yes.
you share?
Well, talking about the financial impact, there's something that companies don't measure typically. And yes, of course, the brand trust and when it goes out into the news, that's massive. But even with the smaller recalls, right? Just discarding the good product, going to those specific locations where the product wasn't there and having all these people look for product and the time wasted. I mean, we did calculations across the board on all of that. You can reference the IPC subway traceability case study, where actually that was one of the really good reasons our suppliers started looking at this, because we said, look, we were looking for these many we went to these many restaurants, right? Thousands or whatever it was, to find your product. And this is what it cost you initially to do this recall. If we would have known where the product was, this is how many actual locations received the product. And just looking at that comparison, I mean, there's so much money invested in and lost in this every single time there's a recall, not just when it goes out to the news and it becomes very, very drastic. We have another example of one of those drastic scenarios, the romaine lettuce recall in 2019. I mean, that caused the industry between, I believe, 276 and $340 million, just and then that's when we all stopped, eating lettuce for a while. I tried kale. It was good. I like it. I still like it. But if you think about it, the consumer price went up 168%. So it's the cost to not be able to quickly react, to quickly go to those locations that actually are impacted. It's massive, and people don't typically calculate that.
Those are great examples. Julie, Lucy, Christian, thank you for helping us unpack the FSMA 204 compliance extension and what it means for our industry. To learn more or catch past episodes, visit aim-na.org. The AIM Food Supply Chain Work Group meets on the third Thursday of every month. Thanks for listening. See you next time.